Welcome to Spill the Ink, a podcast by Reputation Inc., where we feature experts in growth and brand visibility for law firms and architecture, engineering, and construction firms. Now, let's get started with the show.
Hey everyone, it's Michelle Calco-King here. I'm the host of this show and also the principal and president of Reputation Inc., a public relations and content marketing agency for law firms. We understand how sophisticated corporate buyers find and select law firms. For the past 10 years, we've helped law firms grow through thought leadership-fueled strategies, including media relations, byline article placement, blogging, email marketing, video marketing, social media, litigation PR, and more. To learn more, go to rep-inc, that's Inc with a K.com, or email us at info@rep-inc.com. So our guest today is Marcie Borgal Shunk. She's the president and founder of the Tilt Institute. I love that name, by the way.
Thanks.
Specializing in helping law firms shepherd significant transformation. Described as a sociologist of lawyers, Marcie trains and coaches leadership teams and emerging leaders to create dynamic plans, shift mindsets, and motivate action. Through the Tilt Institute, Marcie offers analytics, leadership training and coaching, cultural assessments, and more to help law firms transform their businesses. Prior to founding the Tilt Institute in 2016, Marcie was a principal at the BTI Consulting Group and a senior consultant with Law Vision Group. She's a graduate of Harvard University. So thank you for joining me.
Thank you for having me, Michelle. I'm honored to hear that you like the name. I was working with a firm a couple of weeks ago where the lawyer said, okay, I'm ready to get started, but I just have to say the Tilt Institute, I'm not okay with the name.
You're kidding. What was it? Did he have any specifics or no?
No, It was just, I don't know, for some reason it rubbed him the wrong way.
He didn't like it. Well, you can't please everybody. I spent forever coming up with the name for my business. And when I see well-named businesses, I just know how hard it is to find something that really, really resonates and works and is also a bit unique. So, and it also, it does speak to what you do because you kind of help with, I guess that transformation, that tilt into something new. But well, let's start with, maybe just telling us a little bit about what you do and sort of why you founded the Tilt Institute.
Sure. Well, you're spot on. So the origin of the name was from wanting to shift people's perspectives, right? Mm-hmm. What happens if we look at something differently? Are we able to use that to shift our journey and change the direction in which we're headed? So I help law firm leaders predominantly through significant transformations. And that can be in the form of strategy. It can be in the form of a shift from maybe a practice group structure to an industry group structure. More recently, not surprisingly, with everything that's going on in the world, it has been related either to the pandemic or to the Great Resignation, right? This idea of how do we do things differently in order to address our talent needs?
Yeah, talk about an industry that needs help with change. It's not an industry that's known for that. Well, let's talk about this, the so-called Great Resignation. So, from what I've read and I saw on your website, law firms are grappling with, widespread poaching, understaffing, salary wars. How are you coaching your clients about how to survive and change, in this turmoil right now?
Sure. Well, it certainly isn't easy. And I guess one piece of comfort is it's not just law firms that are dealing with this right now, right? This is a global issue. Yeah. It's happening a lot, quite a bit in the US in particular, but it's across different sectors, right? So it's not limited to law firms, which is at least comforting because sometimes when we talk about issues, they are limited to law firms.
Right.
And other industries seem to be so much further ahead. So this is one where, we're kind of all at the same stage of our journey right now. And one of the things we're seeing within law firms is they're recognizing the challenge and attempting to improve the situation. And they're doing so, number one, unfortunately, is always compensation, right? We'll just throw money at the problem.
Yeah.
And for a short-term solution, that will likely work for a few months, right? That'll make people move, but it won't necessarily solve the underlying issue.
Right.
Similarly, we're seeing other Band-Aids like we'll give you more vacation time or we'll shift your benefits. And that's all well and good. But again, those are Band-Aids. They don't solve the root issue. Mm-hmm. And so if you really want to get as a law firm to the root of the issue, there's a number of different areas. One is, and we're not going to get into how to solve this, but billable hour is still a problem, right?
Yeah,
if you are paid for the amount of time that you are devoting, then it makes it very difficult for people to take the time that they need for their own well-being.
Yeah.
But if we kind of set that aside, so we're not going to transform the structure of the law firm just yet, we have the culture, talent, and leadership, right? So the talent model, culture, that underlying, just what are the behavioral norms and the unwritten rules of the organization in the way that people interact with one another. And then the leadership component, do the people who are leading the firm have the skills and the tools and the resources that they need to do it effectively? And those are two places where law firms really trip up and fall down.
Yeah. And you do a lot of work in the leadership area, the leadership development. How do you help law firms create, create this leadership development, I guess, culture, and how do you help them develop their leaders? What are some of the ways firms should be thinking about that?
Sure. So there's really 3 primary ways that leaders develop: education, experience, and strengths. Mm-hmm. And so some firms are doing strength indicators, right? The ability for people to get a greater level of self-awareness so that they can understand what their strengths are. And one of the best pieces of information I got when I was learning about myself and my strength is, when you think about your strengths, they're not just the things that you're good at, they're also the things that give you energy. So you may be good at something that sucks you dry, right? Yeah. Proofreading falls into that for me.
Right.
I'm good at proofreading, but I don't enjoy it. Mm-hmm. So there's the strengths component and that level of self-awareness, which, there are some firms that are doing disc profiles or type coach or other types of tools to give people that level of self-awareness, but it's a pretty small number at this point. And interestingly enough, it happens more often on the professional side of the firm than it does on the lawyer side.
Yeah, I could see that.
On the experience side, that's, your any day experience that you can get, on a field, in a committee room, in a PTO, right? There's so many places you can get leadership skills and experience. And then, of course, as you elevate as a lawyer up the ranks, you can get leadership experience that way as well. And then there's the education component. And we published in 2020, interestingly enough, I did a study with Law Vision where we talked to AmLaw 200 firms, the professional development leaders, and we asked about leader development and business development. And with leader development training, only 33% of firms are giving their partners any kind of leader development training. And those that are, it's 11 hours on average. Yeah. So the amount of investment into preparing leaders and giving them the training, education tools that they need within law firms, at least right now, is pretty dismal.
Why? So why do you think law firms aren't seeing this as an area that they need to focus on when it, for people like us, it's sort of obvious, but why is there that, resistance or maybe an awareness of the issue?
I think the timeline for law firms, when you think about the industry and the evolution of the industry, is historically it was okay to just be a good lawyer, right? You didn't even have to have business development for a period of time. It was okay just to be a good lawyer. Right. And then over time, the market shifted and we realized, okay, we have firms that are not doing well because the partners aren't developing enough business. They're not holding their own. And there's not a room or as much room for service partners who are just really good lawyers and not able to work with the clients and generate business. So that emphasis shifted. And I think we're seeing that same thing happen again, right? Is this transition again where developing and mentoring talent is increasingly important. We have a new generation with different values that we're dealing with in law firms, which is certainly part of it. But I think it's also just a shift in the complexity of issues that clients are facing. And so we are now in an industry where, we don't just hire a litigator to solve our litigation issues. We hire a team to come together and bring their individual expertise to bear on what are increasingly complex problems that demand collaboration. And that requires leadership, right? That's more about the people and the development and getting teams to work effectively together than it has been.
Got it. So it's a lot about, just sort of firms kind of catching up with the complexity of what their business is today. So yeah, I can understand that. And why is there this disconnect between what it takes to be a great lawyer and sort of what it takes to be a good leader? What is that disconnect? What does it look like and why does it exist?
Sure. That's a great point. And I think this is another area where it's not just law firms that grapple with this, right? So what it takes to elevate within a law firm is to be a good lawyer. And typically, there are many partnerships still that say, associates, don't worry about anything else. Just worry about learning your legal skills. And then they hit where they're ready to be a senior associate or a junior partner. They have had no training in mentorship or management of other people. And yet they've probably been responsible for that since they were a mid-level attorney. They are coming into a situation where they're going to be taking on responsibility for developing business and don't necessarily have training in doing that. And so there are levels and layers along the way where the associates are continue to develop without necessarily getting the soft skill side of what they need.
Yeah.
And then, of course, there's the right. In terms of how law firms and lawyers in particular look at one another, often there's a filter that if you are not a good lawyer or if you are not a good rainmaker, then you don't have as much value, right? There, unfortunately, that connection. Yeah. And if you put somebody in a position that may have phenomenal leadership skills, but perhaps doesn't have the respect or influence across the firm, which is a reality today still, then that's one of the greatest areas of disconnect. So it's part the education and development piece and part how do we shift the mindset?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. It's almost to the point where, you're going to always have that unicorn of great lawyer and great leader, and finding both of those can be, I would imagine, quite tough. So, or we switch that thinking. So let's talk about, so we're unfortunately still in this pandemic. How has the pandemic impacted this issue, leadership in law firms and how lawyers lead?
I think it's really magnified the issue to the extent, well, a couple of things. One is I think that initially lawyers have skills that are incredibly valuable in a crisis, right? So they have the ability to be decisive and to set direction and to respond to issues as they come up, right? They're analytical in nature. So from that perspective, many of the qualities that lawyers have puts them in a better situation to effectively lead through crisis. So we'll start there. I think that generally that's been a positive. Yeah. Now, the other thing that it's done, though, is it has highlighted the lack of preparation most leaders have in law firms. And so they're dealing anew with situations that they've little experience with. They have little training to handle. And I think over the next, we've already started seeing it, but I think over the next year or two, we're going to continue to see leadership transitions in part because of that, right? To suddenly be thrust into a situation where you are making daily decisions and are not equipped with the tools to do so leads to burnout, right?
Yeah, absolutely. There's no better test of leadership than having to deal with sudden change. And this has been nothing but change for the last 2 years.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. Interesting. So the other thing I noticed that you write a lot about is culture. And it's interesting because that's becoming a big topic also on the, in the legal marketing circles. So it seems to be something that a lot of firms are thinking about now. How do you help firms evaluate their culture and kind of achieve that ideal culture? What does that process look like? What are some things that you're, because it feels like culture I'm sure you get the pushback that culture is just one of those kind of intangible, organic things that can't be created. So I'd love to hear how you help firms with that.
Right. It's great that you said that. And there's so much that could be said on this topic. And I have to say, you probably saw Jordan Furlong wrote an article within the past week on culture, which is fantastic and kind of breaks it down and makes it clear. And so culture can be measured despite what people think. Culture ultimately is about tendencies and behavioral norms within the organization. And there are researchers and people out there organizations, Fortune 1000 organizations, global organizations that have been measuring culture for decades. So this is not a new concept in terms of that. And Human Synergistics International is one of the tools. They have an organizational culture inventory, which is something that I have a certification in using. But it's one of many tools out there to measure your culture and truly get some clarity with respect to whether or not you have a constructive culture, meaning a culture which encourages people to be the best they can be and gives them the freedom and flexibility to grow and feel supported. Or if you have a culture that may feel more competitive or oppositional, or a culture where people just sit back and wait for somebody else to tell them what to do. So it's interesting in doing those cultural studies within law firms. Oftentimes the cultural experience is quite different depending on the group within the firm, right? So for partners, they tend to experience that constructive, positive culture. For associates, it tends to be a little bit more competitive, striving for perfection, low tolerance for failure. And then for the professionals and the staff, oftentimes we see this, I don't want to stretch because I'm afraid I'm going to get my hands slapped. And so I'll sit back and wait for somebody to tell me what to do. And then, of course, lawyers get frustrated that nobody takes initiative. So it's there's certainly a lot going on within the cultural framework in law firms and a lot to be learned there.
Yeah. I imagine it's a lot like therapy. A big part of therapy is just becoming aware of things. It's the therapist's job to help the patient sort of understand things. So I imagine that the culture assessments is a big part of it. Is just that. It's just so that they understand what exists now, so that then they can figure out what they might want to change or improve upon or, foster, that kind of thing.
Yes, that's exactly right. And when you look at the connection between culture and leadership, leaders have a stronger influence, not the only influence. Every individual within the organization influences culture. It's an organic thing. However, leaders have a stronger influence on culture. And so the lack of leader development, training, and preparedness, combined with not measuring where we're at and having clarity, like you just said, that self-awareness component kind of leaves law firms at a bit of a crossroads right now.
Yeah. The big topic I hear around culture too is, how do we maintain our culture if we are remote or hybrid? How are you addressing that with firms? And is that concern valid? That their culture will be, destroyed if people are working from home?
You wrote it. Yes and no. I think there's, we need to start with the question of understanding what the culture truly is to begin with before we say we want to maintain it, because we may be wanting to maintain or reinstitute a culture that had negative elements and components. And so there's that piece of it. And then secondarily, and I've been saying this over and over since the pandemic started, this idea of being deliberate and intentional about the way we engage elevates in a hybrid environment or a remote environment where we can't rely on bumping into each other in the hallways as our primary source of professional development and cultural connection. We need to instead reach out to people. It needs to be a deliberate and intentional effort. And that includes culture, right? Clearly defining what behaviors we want to see more of in our organization, and then building those into how we engage with one another and do business is how cultural change happens.
Yeah, absolutely. The other area I want to make sure we talk about is data and analytics. And I saw in some of your writings that, there's an increased demand for firms to have, more data, more research intelligence. What kind, I guess, describe that for me. What kinds of data are firms being pushed to have from clients, and how are they responding to that ask?
Sure. So I think there's different layers of data. So there's what you just described, which is what clients are looking for, and clients are looking for better metrics and clarity into their matters from a matter management perspective. So what does the budget look like? What does the time investment look like? Really, they're looking for scoping, which is traditionally not something that lawyers have done.
Yeah.
So there's that side of it. From a market competitiveness perspective, there's the client side, right? Understanding the clients. It is striking to me that many law firms can't tell you which client or client types are more profitable for them, or which, matters are more profitable for them. And so that component is a pretty substantial one. And then there's the competitive piece, right? Looking externally at market opportunities, which I think law firms are a little bit better at, in part because there's data available for them to look externally, whereas their own internal data is a bit of a mess in most instances.
I can see that. Are firms starting to prioritize this? Is this, especially the market intelligence, understanding, which clients are more profitable, that kind of thing? Are you seeing that become more of a priority?
Yes, we are. And if you look at the industry holistically and you look at the trends, there is a renewed interest, or maybe more interest just in general, in bringing in people who have the skills to help on that side. So the roles like practice management or chief practice officer or profitability or project management, we've seen more and more of those roles in law firms. And those are the people ideally with analytical skills and the background to be able to help the law firms organize and get that in order. And similarly, they're then pushing on, okay, you want me to do this job where I'm looking at practice management and profitability, but I don't have the data. So they're then creating a demand for data strategy and people that come in on that side.
Right. How to collect the data, and then what do you do with it? That's fascinating. This was a very fascinating conversation. I really appreciate you taking the time. So we've been talking to Marcie Borgal Shunk. I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly.
You are. Thank you.
Oh, good. Of the Tilt Institute. So if people wanted to learn more about you and your work, where should they go?
My website would probably be the best place. It's www.thetiltinstitute.com.
Great. Well, thank you so much.
My pleasure. Thank you, Michelle.
Thanks for listening to Spill the Ink, a podcast by Reputation Inc. We'll see you again next time, and be sure to click subscribe to get future episodes.